The heavy oak door of the conference room closed with a satisfying click behind me, and I couldn't help but savor the moment as Mason Stewart's face went completely white. For 3 years he'd walked past me in office hallways, barely acknowledging my existence as I quietly mopped floors and emptied wastebaskets, just another invisible cleaning lady in her worn gray uniform. But today, as I took my rightful seat at the head of the polished mahogany table, the gold nameplate before me reading Margaret Stone, CEO and founder, Premier Cleaning Solutions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I watched his coffee mug freeze halfway to his lips, his mouth hanging open in stunned disbelief. "Good morning, Mason," I said smoothly, adjusting my tailored navy business suit, quite different from the maintenance uniform he was accustomed to seeing me wear. "I believe you know me as Grace's grandmother, or perhaps more familiarly as just the maid. Shall we begin this company-wide review meeting? The story of how I went from being dismissed as an elderly cleaning woman to revealing myself as the owner of the very company that employed my grandson's arrogant fiancé is one of patience, observation, and the ultimate satisfaction of proving that respect should never depend on someone's job title. For 3 long years I scrubbed toilets and dusted desks in the building I owned, watching and listening, as Mason Stewart climbed the corporate ladder through manipulation and disrespect, all while planning to marry my beloved granddaughter Grace. He never suspected that the irrelevant old woman he barely noticed was not only his boss, but also someone who had been carefully documenting every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, and every moment that revealed his true character when he thought no one important was watching. Mason struggled to find his voice, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Mrs. Stone, I don't understand. You work in maintenance. How can you be the CEO?" I finished for him, allowing myself a slight smile. "It's quite simple, really. 3 years ago, I made a very deliberate choice to step away from the executive suite and observe my company from the ground up. What I discovered during that time has been absolutely fascinating." I opened the leather portfolio in front of me, revealing pages of detailed notes I'd compiled during my time as an invisible employee. "You see, Mason, when people think you don't matter, they show you exactly who they really are. They speak freely about their true opinions, their real ambitions, and their genuine character. For instance, I've learned quite a lot about how you treat people you consider beneath your station." The color drained further from Mason's face as understanding began to dawn. Around the conference table, the other department heads, people who had supervised me during my cleaning duties, sat in various states of shock and confusion. Some looked impressed, others appeared terrified as they mentally reviewed every interaction they'd had with Margaret the cleaning lady over the past 3 years. "Mrs. Stone," Mason stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, "if I had known your position, I would never have." "Exactly," I interrupted, my tone remaining pleasant but firm. "You would have treated me differently if you'd known I had power. That's precisely the problem, isn't it? The fact that you need to know someone's status before you can manage basic human decency tells me everything I need to know about your character." I had never planned to spend 3 years pushing a mop bucket through the offices of Premier Cleaning Solutions, the company I'd built from nothing after my husband passed away. But sometimes life presents you with unexpected opportunities to truly understand what you've created. When my granddaughter Grace first introduced me to Mason at a family dinner 2 years ago, something about his practiced charm and carefully modulated respect set off warning bells in my mind. He was too smooth, too calculated in how he presented himself to different people. That's when I realized the unique advantage my unusual situation provided. As Margaret Stone, CEO, I would only see the version of Mason that he wanted me to see, the ambitious young executive courting the boss's granddaughter. But as Margaret the cleaning lady, I could observe the real Mason Stewart, the man my granddaughter was planning to marry. "You know," I continued, settling back in my chair, "there's something almost magical about being invisible. People reveal their authentic selves when they believe their words and actions have no consequences. Over the past 3 years, I've witnessed behavior that would shock you. I've seen which employees stay late to help their colleagues, which managers treat support staff with genuine respect, and which executives I paused meaningfully, view cleaning workers as less than human. Mason's hands were trembling slightly as he gripped his coffee mug. Mrs. Stone, I want to assure you that I have the utmost respect for all employees, regardless of their position. If there's been any misunderstanding, oh, there's been no misunderstanding, I said calmly. I have very clear memories of our interactions. Would you like me to share some of them with the group? For instance, the time you told your colleague Eric that you were trying to limit Grace's grandmother's visibility at family events because having a cleaning lady as in-law baggage wouldn't look good for your career advancement. The silence in the room was deafening. Mason looked like he might be physically ill, and I could see several other department heads shifting uncomfortably in their seats, likely reviewing their own treatment of the maintenance staff. Or perhaps, I continued, we should discuss your comments about how Grace inherited her work ethic from the wrong side of the family since her grandmother was just a maid who probably never had a real job in her life. Those were your exact words, weren't they, Mason? His mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound, like a fish gasping for air. The confident, articulate young executive, who had been preparing to present his quarterly performance report just minutes earlier, had been reduced to speechless terror. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, I said, closing the portfolio with a decisive snap. Before we delve into the specifics of what I've observed during my 3 years of fieldwork, perhaps we should start at the beginning. The story of how Premier Cleaning Solutions came to exist, and why its 73-year-old founder decided to trade her corner office for a mop bucket and discover what her company really looked like from the bottom up. I stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Riverside, the city where I'd built everything from scratch 42 years ago. The view from the 20th floor of the Meridian Business Center showed the sprawling metropolitan area that had become home to Premier Cleaning Solutions headquarters, but my mind drifted back to much humbler beginnings. You see, Mason, I said, my back still turned to the stunned conference room. Premier Cleaning Solutions didn't start in a boardroom or with venture capital. It started in my kitchen in 1982, when I was a 31-year-old widow with a 6-year-old daughter and exactly $300 to my name. I turned back to face the room, noting how every person was hanging on my words. Even the department heads, who had known me as Margaret the cleaning lady, were discovering a completely different person than they'd imagined. My husband Robert died in a construction accident when our daughter Susan was just starting first grade. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses, and I found myself facing a choice: accept welfare and government assistance, or find a way to support my family with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. I returned to my seat, pulling out a worn photograph from my portfolio, a picture of a much younger me standing beside a beat-up Ford van with Stone's cleaning service, painted on the side in uneven letters. I started with a bucket, some basic supplies, and that old van you see there. My first contract was cleaning a small insurance office after hours for $25 a week. I scrubbed every inch of that place like my life depended on it, because frankly, it did. Susan would do her homework in the waiting area while I worked, and I promised her that someday we'd have something better. Mason had regained some of his composure, though his face remained pale. Mrs. Stone, I had no idea about your background. That's quite an impressive story. Oh, we're just getting started, I replied with a slight smile. By 1985, I had expanded to cleaning 3 office buildings. I reinvested every penny back into the business: better equipment, more supplies, additional contracts. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, because I understood something that many people don't: there's dignity in honest work regardless of what that work is. I pulled out another photograph, this one showing a small storefront with Stone Cleaning Services in professional lettering across the window. In 1987, I opened my first real office and hired my first employee, a young mother named Sylvia Gray, who needed flexible hours to care for her disabled son. Sylvia is now our director of operations, by the way. She's been with the company for 37 years and owns a beautiful home in Oakwood Heights, plus a vacation cabin in the mountains. Her son graduated from college debt-free, thanks to our employee education program. I could see some of the department heads nodding with recognition. Sylvia Gray was indeed a respected figure in the company, though I doubted many of them had ever considered her humble beginnings. The key to our early success, I continued. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Was understanding that cleaning isn't just about making things look nice. It's about creating environments where people can be productive, healthy, and comfortable. We weren't just janitors, we were professionals providing an essential service. I trained every employee to take pride in their work and to understand that they were valued members of our team. Mason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That's a very admirable philosophy, Mrs. Stone. By 1992, we had grown to serve over 50 commercial clients throughout the metro area. I had learned to bid contracts competitively while maintaining fair wages for our employees. But more importantly, I had learned to observe people, really observe them. When you clean someone's office, you see how they treat their space, their belongings, and most tellingly, how they treat the person cleaning up after them. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze fixed on Mason. Some people would thank me for my work, ask about my day, treat me like a human being worthy of basic courtesy. Others would act as though I was invisible, or worse, speak about me as if I couldn't hear them. Those observations taught me valuable lessons about character that served me well as the company expanded. The room was completely silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I could tell that several people were beginning to understand the implications of my story, realizing that if I had been observing and learning from the very beginning, the past 3 years of my undercover work had been anything but unusual for me. In 1995, I incorporated as Premier Cleaning Solutions and began acquiring smaller cleaning companies throughout the region. Each acquisition brought new employees, new contracts, and new opportunities to refine our approach. I insisted on maintaining our core values, respect for our workers, pride in our services, and the understanding that every job from CEO to night janitor contributes to our collective success. I pulled out a more recent photograph showing the ribbon-cutting ceremony for our current headquarters building 5 years ago. Today, Premier Cleaning Solutions employs over 800 people across 4 states. We service everything from small law offices to major corporate headquarters, hospitals, schools, and government buildings. Our annual revenue exceeds $40 million, and we've been named one of the region's top employers for 6 consecutive years. Mason's eyes widened at the financial figures. I could practically see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about his fiancée's family situation. But the most important thing I learned during those 40 years, I said, my voice taking on a more serious tone, is that success without integrity is worthless. Money without character is meaningless, and respect that depends on someone's job title or bank account isn't respect at all, it's opportunism. I stood again, smoothing down my suit jacket. Which brings us to 3 years ago, when my granddaughter Grace first mentioned she was dating a promising young executive named Mason Stewart, a man who worked for one of the companies we contracted with, and who seemed very interested in making a good impression on her family. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches as everyone realized we were approaching the heart of the story. That's when I made a decision that probably seemed eccentric to some people, but made perfect sense to me. I decided it was time to step back into the field and see my company and the people in it from the ground up once again. I returned to my seat and opened another section of my portfolio, revealing a letter that had clearly been read many times, its edges worn from handling. 3 years ago, I received this letter from Dr. Patricia Albert, my family physician. She'd been treating me for what we initially thought was just routine fatigue and joint pain. After several tests, she delivered news that changed everything: early-stage rheumatoid arthritis, along with the beginning signs of osteoporosis. Mason's expression shifted slightly, perhaps the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him, a flicker of what might have been concern or surprise. Now, before anyone starts feeling sorry for me, I continued with a wry smile. Let me be clear, the diagnosis wasn't a death sentence. With proper treatment and lifestyle adjustments, Dr. Albert assured me I could manage both conditions effectively for many years. But it did force me to confront some uncomfortable realities about aging, about legacy, and about what would happen to Premier Cleaning Solutions when I was no longer able to run it. I pulled out a legal document, my will and succession plan, though I kept the details facing away from the group. For 40 years I had poured everything into building this company. I worked those 16-hour days, sacrificed vacations, missed family events, all in service of creating something that would provide security for my daughter Susan, and eventually for my granddaughter Grace. But sitting in Dr. Albert's office that day, I realized I had been so focused on building premier cleaning solutions that I had lost touch with what it had actually become. The conference room remained silent, everyone hanging on my words. I could see some of the department heads exchanging glances, perhaps remembering their own interactions with me during those early days of my field research. You see, when you're the CEO sitting in a corner office on the 20th floor, people tell you what they think you want to hear. Financial reports show you numbers, but they don't show you reality. Employee satisfaction surveys provide data, but they don't capture the truth of what happens when the boss isn't watching. I stood and began pacing slowly around the conference table, my hands clasped behind my back. I realized that if I was going to leave this company to my family, if I was going to trust that Premier Cleaning Solutions would continue to operate according to the values I had instilled, I needed to truly understand what we had become. Not what I hoped we were, not what the reports suggested we were, but what we actually were when nobody thought Margaret Stone was paying attention. Mason had recovered enough to attempt engagement. That's very thorough of you, Mrs. Stone. Most executives rely on management reports and regular staff meetings to stay informed about company culture. Exactly the problem, I replied, stopping directly behind his chair. Management reports tell you what middle management wants you to know. Staff meetings reveal what employees are comfortable saying in front of their supervisors. But the real culture of a company, the actual treatment of employees, the genuine quality of service, the true character of your workforce, that can only be observed from the inside. I returned to my portfolio and pulled out another document, my original plan, written in my own handwriting. So I developed what I called the foundation assessment. I would step back from day-to-day operations, install a competent management team to handle routine decisions, and spend one full year working alongside our frontline employees. I wanted to see Premier Cleaning Solutions through the eyes of our most essential workers, the people who actually interacted with our clients every day. I could see several department heads shifting uncomfortably, clearly wondering what I might have observed about their management styles. But then Grace brought Mason home for dinner, and my one-year assessment plan suddenly became much more personal, and much more important. The mention of his name caused Mason to straighten in his chair, his carefully controlled expression betraying a hint of nervousness. Grace was absolutely glowing that evening. She talked about this wonderful man she'd met, charming, ambitious, successful. She mentioned that he worked for Hartwell and Associates, which I knew was one of our corporate clients. She was clearly smitten, and as her grandmother, I wanted to be happy for her. I paused, allowing the weight of my next words to settle. But something about Mason's behavior that evening troubled me. Nothing obvious. He was perfectly polite, appropriately deferential, said all the right things. But I've been reading people for 73 years, and there were small tells that concerned me. The way he spoke about his coworkers, the casual dismissiveness when Grace mentioned her part-time job at the community center, the subtle way he steered conversations toward his own achievements. Mason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he remained silent. Most concerning was how he reacted when Grace mentioned that her grandmother, me, worked in the cleaning industry. Not owned a cleaning company, mind you, because Grace didn't know that at the time. She simply said her grandmother worked for a cleaning service. The look that flashed across Mason's face lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it told me everything I needed to know about his actual values. I returned to my seat and leaned forward, my gaze fixed directly on Mason. That's when I expanded my foundation assessment plan. Instead of 1 year observing our general operations, I would spend however long it took to truly understand the character of the man my granddaughter was falling in love with. I would see Mason Stewart as he really was when he thought no one important was watching. The room was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I submitted my formal resignation as active CEO to the board of directors, citing health reasons and the need for a sabbatical. I installed Peter Gray, Sylvia's husband and our former VP of operations, as interim CEO. Then I applied for a position with our own company under my maiden name, Margaret Albert, cleaning specialist. Mason's face had gone pale again as the full scope of my deception began to dawn on him. For 3 years, Mason, I have cleaned your office, emptied your trash, and listened to your conversations. I have been invisible in plain sight, observing exactly who you are when you think there are no consequences for your words or actions. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. And what I discovered exceeded my worst fears. I opened a thick folder labeled Operational Assessment Phase 1 and spread several documents across the conference table. The pages contained detailed organizational charts, employee schedules, and what appeared to be a comprehensive analysis of our company's structure. Implementing my undercover assessment required careful planning. I began, noting how Mason's eyes darted nervously across the documents. I couldn't simply walk into our own building and start mopping floors without raising suspicions. 3 years of preparation went into creating Margaret Albert's identity and establishing her credibility as a cleaning professional. I pulled out a worn employment application with my photograph attached, the same picture that had been on my employee ID badge for the past 3 years, though I doubted Mason had ever looked at it closely enough to recognize me now. First, I needed legitimate experience and references. I spent 6 months working for Sterling Janitorial Services, one of our smaller competitors, learning their methods and building a verifiable work history. I worked the night shift at a medical complex in Brookfield, 40 miles from here, where no one would recognize Margaret Stone, CEO of Premier Cleaning Solutions. Several department heads exchanged glances, clearly amazed by the depth of my deception. Eric Patterson, our head of human resources, looked particularly stunned as he likely realized he had personally processed my employment application. During those 6 months at Sterling, I relearned the physical demands of cleaning work. My hands, which had grown soft from decades of office work, developed calluses again. My back ached from the constant bending and lifting. But more importantly, I remembered what it felt like to be treated as invisible, to have conversations happen around me as if I weren't there. I stood and walked over to Eric, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Eric, you interviewed Margaret Albert for her position here 3 years ago. Do you remember that interview? Eric nodded slowly, his face flushed with embarrassment. Yes, ma'am. I remember thinking she was overqualified for the position. Her references were excellent, and she had more experience than most of our applicants. And yet you hired her for the night shift, cleaning office buildings rather than our more prestigious daytime commercial accounts. Why was that? Eric swallowed hard. Well, she was older than our typical hires. I thought the night work might be less demanding, and frankly, some of our corporate clients prefer younger, more presentable staff for daytime cleaning. Exactly, I said, returning to my seat. Even our own HR department, despite policies I had personally established about age discrimination, was unconsciously steering the older applicant toward less visible work. It was the perfect position for my purposes. I pulled out a detailed schedule showing the rotation of cleaning assignments across our various corporate accounts. I specifically requested assignment to the Hartwell and Associates building, claiming I preferred working in professional office environments. What I didn't mention was that I knew Mason Stewart worked there, and that this would give me regular access to observe him in his natural habitat. Mason finally found his voice. Mrs. Stone, this all seems rather elaborate. If you had concerns about my character, wouldn't it have been simpler to conduct a background check or ask Grace about our relationship directly? Oh, I did conduct a background check, I replied with a slight smile. Financially and legally you were spotless. Excellent credit score, no criminal history, stellar employment record. But background checks don't reveal character, Mason. They don't show you how someone treats people they consider beneath their notice. I opened another section of my portfolio, revealing what appeared to be a training manual. After securing my position, I needed to ensure my cover story would hold up under scrutiny. I studied our employee handbook as if I'd never seen it before, memorized the names and backgrounds of all our long-term employees, and even practiced the slightly stooped posture and careful movements of someone dealing with joint pain. I pulled out a small recording device, the kind used for voice memos. I also began documenting everything, not illegally recording conversations, mind you, but keeping detailed notes about interactions, behaviors, and patterns I observed. Every night after my shift, I would return home and transcribe my observations, building a comprehensive picture of how Premier Cleaning Solutions actually functioned versus how I had believed it functioned. The recording device seemed to make several people in the room nervous, particularly Mason, who was probably wondering what conversations might have been documented. The most crucial element of my plan was establishing relationships with my fellow employees. I needed to be seen as a genuine member of the cleaning staff, not an outsider gathering intelligence. This meant forming real friendships, sharing real struggles, and genuinely caring about the people I worked alongside. I pulled out a group photograph showing myself in my gray cleaning uniform, standing with 4 other women in front of the Hartwell and Associates building. My arm was around a young Hispanic woman, who was smiling broadly. This is Maria Gonzalez, who was assigned as my training partner. Single mother of 3, working 2 jobs to pay for nursing school. Over the past 3 years, she became not just my colleague but my friend. She taught me efficiency techniques I never knew existed, shared her homemade tamales during our lunch breaks, and confided in me about her dreams of becoming a registered nurse. I turned the photograph toward Mason. Maria cleans your office every Tuesday and Friday. In 3 years you have never once acknowledged her presence, learned her name, or responded to her polite good morning greetings. To you she's invisible furniture that occasionally moves around your workspace. Mason's discomfort was becoming more obvious. I work early hours, and I'm usually focused on important calls and meetings. I'm sure I've been polite when I've noticed. When you've noticed, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? Maria is invisible to you because her job title doesn't warrant your attention. I returned the photograph to my portfolio and pulled out what appeared to be a detailed organizational chart of the night cleaning crew. Through Maria and other colleagues, I learned about the real culture of Premier Cleaning Solutions from the bottom up. I discovered which supervisors treated their teams with respect, which clients appreciated our work, and which buildings presented particular challenges. But most importantly, I gained access to the after-hours world where people's true characters emerge. I fixed my gaze directly on Mason, allowing the full weight of my next words to land, and that's where your education began, Mason. 3 years of watching you when you thought absolutely no one important was paying attention. I pulled out a worn notebook, its pages filled with handwritten observations and dates, evidence of my 3 years living a double life. Adapting to life as Margaret Albert proved more challenging than I had anticipated. I began, flipping through the notebook's pages. The physical demands were significant. My arthritis made the long hours of standing, bending, and lifting genuinely difficult. But the emotional adjustment was even harder. I showed the room a page covered in my careful script, documenting daily schedules and employee interactions. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., I would wake up in my modest apartment on Elm Street. Yes, I rented a small place across town to maintain my cover and prepare for my shift. I wore the same gray uniform as every other cleaning employee, carried the same supply cart, and followed the same protocols I had established decades earlier as company policy. Mason shifted uncomfortably as I described the routine he had witnessed hundreds of times without truly seeing it. The Hartwell and Associates building became my regular assignment 3 nights per week, 23 floors of offices, conference rooms, and executive suites. I cleaned everything from bathroom fixtures to boardroom tables, always moving quietly, efficiently, maintaining the invisibility that my position provided. I turned to a specific page in my notebook, dated from my 2nd month on the job. Initially, the other cleaning staff were suspicious of me. Here was this older woman, clearly educated, speaking differently than most of their colleagues. Maria Gonzalez asked me directly why someone with my obvious intelligence was pushing a mop cart at 70 years old. I smiled at the memory. I told her a version of the truth, that I had been an office worker for decades, that my husband's death had left me with limited retirement savings, and that I needed the income and health insurance. It wasn't entirely false, just incomplete. Eric Patterson, our HR director, looked particularly uncomfortable. Mrs. Stone, I feel terrible that we didn't recognize. I mean, if we had known about your financial situation. Eric, that's exactly the point, I interrupted gently. Margaret Albert received the same treatment as any other employee in her position. No special consideration, no extra attention, no assumptions about her capabilities beyond what her job description required. It was perfect for my purposes. I turned several pages in the notebook, showing detailed observations about building security procedures, client preferences, and employee dynamics. Within 6 months, I had become fully integrated into the night cleaning crew. My colleagues shared their stories, their struggles, their observations about the offices we cleaned. I learned that the law firm on the 18th floor always left expensive electronics unsecured, trusting our staff's integrity. I discovered that the marketing company on the 12th floor had installed security cameras specifically to monitor cleaning personnel, treating us as potential threats rather than trusted service providers. Mason's office building was clearly becoming a focal point of my narrative, and his discomfort was increasingly visible. Most importantly, I learned the rhythms of after-hours office life, which executives worked late, and how they treated cleaning staff during those encounters, which employees left considerate notes, thanking us for our work, which offices were left in deliberately messy conditions, as if testing our thoroughness or expressing disdain for our services. I pulled out another document, a detailed floor plan of the Hartwell and Associates building with various offices marked in different colors. By my first anniversary as Margaret Albert, I had mapped the personality and character of nearly every employee in that building based purely on how they interacted with cleaning staff. Green marks indicated people who treated us with basic human courtesy. Yellow marks showed those who were polite, but distant. Red marks, I paused meaningfully, identified individuals who displayed problematic attitudes toward service workers. Mason's office was marked in red, along with several others scattered throughout the building. The most revealing moments came during the evening hours when executives worked late and encountered cleaning staff in otherwise empty offices. Some would apologize for staying past normal hours, understanding that our work was more difficult with people present. Others would act as if we were invisible, continuing phone conversations about confidential matters, discussing personal issues, or revealing their true opinions about colleagues, clients, and family members. I turned to a page filled with what appeared to be direct quotes, dates and times carefully noted. That's when I truly began to understand Mason Stewart's character. Not the polished version he presented to Grace during family dinners, not the professional facade he maintained during business meetings, but the authentic person who emerged when he thought his words and actions had no consequences. I closed the notebook and looked directly at Mason, whose face had gone pale again. For 3 years I cleaned your office twice per week. I emptied your trash, dusted your desk, vacuumed your carpet. I was present during your late-night phone calls, your informal meetings with colleagues, your private conversations when you thought you were alone. The room fell completely silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. And during those 3 years, Mason, you revealed exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching. I opened a new section of my portfolio, this one containing what appeared to be a detailed psychological profile, complete with dates, times, and behavioral observations. Mason Stewart first appeared in my granddaughter's life 18 months into my undercover assignment. I began, pulling out a photograph from Grace's social media, Mason in an expensive suit at some corporate function, his arm around my beaming granddaughter. Grace was 26 then, working as a social worker at the Riverside Community Center while pursuing her master's degree in nonprofit administration. I could see Mason's jaw tighten slightly at the mention of Grace's career choice, a reaction that didn't go unnoticed by the others in the room. Grace has always been drawn to helping others, particularly those who society tends to overlook. As a child, she volunteered at animal shelters. In high school, she organized clothing drives for homeless families. In college, she spent her spring breaks building houses with Habitat for Humanity, instead of partying in Cancun like her classmates. I pulled out another photo, this one showing Grace at a community center event, surrounded by children, her face radiant with genuine joy. When Grace brought Mason to our first family dinner, I was struck by the contrast between them. Here was my granddaughter, someone who had chosen a career helping at-risk youth, despite having other options, sitting beside a man whose every conversation seemed to center on profit margins, networking opportunities, and career advancement. Mason finally spoke up, his voice carefully controlled. "Mrs. Stone, I've always respected Grace's commitment to social work. I think it's admirable that she wants to help people." "Admirable," I repeated slowly, pulling out a small recording device. "That's an interesting word choice, Mason. According to my notes from your phone conversation on March 15th of last year, you described Grace's career as cute but impractical, and suggested she was wasting her education on people who would never appreciate it." The color drained from Mason's face as he realized I had been documenting his private conversations for years. "You see," I continued, putting the device away, "the Mason Stewart who attended family dinners was charming, supportive, and appropriately interested in Grace's work, but the Mason Stewart I observed during late-night phone calls with his colleagues told a very different story." I pulled out a timeline, meticulously handwritten, showing the progression of Mason and Grace's relationship alongside my observations of his behavior. Initially, Mason's interest in Grace seemed genuine, if somewhat superficial. He was attracted to her beauty, her kindness, her family stability, but as their relationship deepened, I began to notice disturbing patterns in how he spoke about her when he thought no one was listening. I turned to a specific entry in my notebook, dated 6 months after they began dating. During a late-night call with his college friend Peter Gray, not our Peter Gray, a different Peter, Mason described Grace as perfect girlfriend materials because she was low maintenance, not career-obsessed like most women his age, and came from good stock. Those were his exact words, good stock, as if Grace were a prized breeding animal rather than an accomplished young woman. Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably at this revelation, and I could see genuine anger flickering in Eric Patterson's eyes. But what truly concerned me was how Mason began attempting to shape Grace's decisions as their relationship progressed. He started suggesting that social work was emotionally draining, and that she might be happier in a more stable career. He encouraged her to consider positions in corporate human resources or nonprofit management, anything that would move her away from direct service to vulnerable populations. I pulled out printed emails that Grace had apparently forwarded to someone, though the recipient was blacked out. Grace confided in her friend Sarah about feeling pressured to change her career focus. She mentioned that Mason had started making comments about how her work schedule conflicted with important social events, how her salary wasn't proportional to her education level, and how difficult it would be to maintain their social circle if she insisted on staying in direct service work. Mason's composure was beginning to crack. "Grace never told me she felt pressured. If she was unhappy with my suggestions, she should have said something." "Ah, but that's the beauty of your approach, isn't it?" I replied smoothly. "You never demanded anything outright. You simply created an environment where Grace felt she needed to choose between her calling and your approval." Classic manipulation technique, making someone believe the changes are their own idea. I turned to another page in my notebook, this one filled with observations about Mason's behavior towards service workers. "But Grace's career wasn't your only area of concern, was it, Mason? You also had strong opinions about her family connections, particularly her grandmother who worked in the cleaning industry." The room fell silent as everyone realized we were approaching the heart of the matter. "You see, Mason has a very specific view of social hierarchy, one that places enormous importance on job titles, income levels, and what he calls professional associations. Having a future mother-in-law who cleaned offices for a living presented a significant image problem for someone with his ambitions." I fixed my gaze directly on him, watching as his carefully constructed facade continued to crumble, and that's when things became truly personal for me. I opened what appeared to be the most comprehensive section of my documentation, a thick folder labeled Behavioral Analysis. Mason Stewart, 2021 to 2024 inches, with subsections marked by colored tabs. Once I understood Mason's true character, my observation became much more focused. I began pulling out pages of meticulously recorded incidents. I began documenting not just his treatment of cleaning staff, but his entire pattern of behavior when he believed himself unobserved. I turned to the first tab section, marked Professional Interactions. Tuesday evenings were particularly revealing. Mason typically worked late on Tuesdays, often taking calls from clients or colleagues while I cleaned his office. On September 12th, 2022, I witnessed him take full credit for a marketing proposal that had clearly been developed by his junior colleague, Lester Patterson. When Lester tried to interject during the client call, Mason literally held up his hand to silence him. Mason's face flushed red. That's taken completely out of context. I was the team lead on that project, and I have 37 similar incidents documented, I interrupted calmly, pulling out more pages. Including the time you told a client that Lester's learning disabilities made him unsuitable for client-facing work, when in fact Lester simply has a mild stutter that doesn't affect his exceptional analytical abilities. I could see several department heads taking notes, clearly disturbed by these revelations about someone they had considered a rising star. But your treatment of colleagues paled in comparison to how you interacted with service workers. I continued, turning to a section marked Staff Interactions in red ink. Maria Gonzalez, as I mentioned, cleaned your office twice weekly for 3 years. Despite her consistent professional service and polite greetings, you never once acknowledged her presence. But it was worse than simple rudeness. You actively treated her as if she were invisible furniture. I pulled out a detailed incident report, written in my careful handwriting, January 23, 2023. Maria was cleaning your office when you received a personal call from Grace. During that conversation, you complained about having to attend some charity thing at Grace's community center, describing it as depressing and full of people who make poor life choices. Maria continued working around you, emptying trash and dusting surfaces, while you spoke as if she couldn't hear or understand every word. Mason's jaw was clenched tight, but he remained silent. March 8, 2023. Maria was vacuuming near your desk when you took a call from your friend Eric, different Eric, not our Eric here, about wedding planning. You told him that Grace's family was mostly decent, but that her grandmother was just a cleaning lady who might be awkward at upscale venues. Maria stopped vacuuming for a moment, clearly hurt by your casual dismissal of her profession. I could see genuine pain in several faces around the table, as they realized how their own attitudes might have affected our employees. But the most telling incidents involved your interactions with our younger female staff members, I said, turning to a section marked Harassment Concerns. Mason went pale. Mrs. Stone, I have never inappropriately touched or propositioned any employee. Physical harassment isn't the only form of workplace misconduct, Mason, I replied evenly. Your pattern of behavior toward young women on our cleaning crew was consistently inappropriate, even if it never crossed into illegality. I pulled out a series of incident reports, each one dated and detailed. Ashley Stewart, no relation to you, is a 22-year-old college student who works part-time for us to pay her tuition. She's assigned to the 14th floor, which includes your office area. On multiple occasions, you made comments about her appearance while she worked, suggesting she was too pretty for cleaning work and asking personal questions about her social life. I turned to another report. When Ashley politely deflected your questions and maintained professional boundaries, you began leaving increasingly messy conditions in your office: coffee spills on the carpet, papers scattered across the floor, bathroom facilities left deliberately unkempt, creating extra work as punishment for her failure to engage with your inappropriate attention. Mason's hands were trembling slightly as he gripped his coffee mug. Those were accidents. I'm sometimes careless when I'm focused on important work. Accidents don't follow patterns, Mason, I replied, showing him a chart tracking the correlation between his behavior and the condition of his office. The mess increased specifically after Ashley rebuffed your personal questions, and decreased when she was replaced temporarily by older staff members. I closed that section and opened another, marked Family References. But perhaps most damaging were your conversations about Grace and her family, particularly during the period when you two began discussing marriage seriously. I pulled out what appeared to be transcribed phone conversations, though I was careful to note they were my detailed recollections rather than actual recordings. October 15, 2023. Late night call with your college fraternity brother about engagement ring shopping. You described Grace as the total package but expressed concern about her bleeding heart career and her working-class family connections. You specifically mentioned needing to manage the optics of having a cleaning lady as a future in-law. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on every devastating word. December 3rd, 2023. Phone conversation with your mother about holiday plans. You told her that Grace's family was perfectly nice, but that her grandmother was just a maid, and you were hoping to minimize her visibility at important social events. I looked directly at Mason, whose carefully constructed image was crumbling before everyone's eyes. 3 years of documentation, Mason. 3 years of watching you reveal your true character when you thought no one important was listening. I pulled out a separate folder, this one marked with yesterday's date and labeled Final Incident Report. My hands trembled slightly, not from age or arthritis, but from the anger I still felt about what I had witnessed. Yesterday morning, December 18th, 2024, at approximately 6:45 a.m., I arrived for my regular cleaning shift at the Hartwell and Associates building. I began, my voice taking on a harder edge. I was running slightly behind schedule due to a delayed bus, and I entered the 14th floor to find you already at your desk, Mason, despite your usual arrival time being after 8 a.m. Mason's face went ashen as he clearly remembered the incident I was about to describe. You were on a conference call with what appeared to be your company's senior partners, discussing your promotion to account director, a position that would come with a significant salary increase and management responsibilities. I opened the folder and pulled out notes written in my shaky handwriting, evidence that I had documented this incident while my hands were still trembling with rage. I began my usual cleaning routine, starting with the offices farthest from yours to avoid disturbing your call. But as I worked my way closer, I could hear your conversation clearly through your open door. I looked around the room, ensuring I had everyone's attention before continuing. The call was going well for you, Mason. The partners were discussing your impressive client retention rates, your successful project completions, your potential for leadership. Then one of them, I believe it was the senior partner, Mr. Hartwell himself, asked about your upcoming wedding and your fiancé's background. Mason's coffee mug was now shaking in his hands, and I could see beads of perspiration forming on his forehead. You told them that Grace was perfect wife material, educated, beautiful, supportive of your career. You mentioned her master's degree, her volunteer work, her stable family background. Everything was going smoothly until Mr. Hartwell asked about Grace's family, specifically whether they would fit in at the company's social events. I paused, letting the tension build before delivering the devastating blow. That's when you laughed, Mason, actually laughed, and you said, and I quote exactly, "Grace's family is mostly fine. Her mother is a high school principal, very respectable, but her grandmother is just a cleaning lady, literally scrubs toilets for a living. We're planning to seat her with the service staff at the wedding reception so she won't feel out of place, and hopefully she'll be too intimidated to say much at family gatherings." The silence in the conference room was deafening. Several department heads were staring at Mason with undisguised shock and disgust. "But you weren't finished," I continued, my voice growing colder. "Mr. Hartwell made some comment about colorful family members being part of marriage, and you replied, 'The old woman doesn't even know she's an embarrassment. Grace wants to invite her to company events, but I've been gradually explaining how that might hurt my professional reputation. She's starting to understand that some people need to be kept separate from our real life.'" A. Mason attempted to speak, but I held up my hand. "Our real life, Mason," as if Grace's grandmother, as if I existed in some lesser reality that wasn't worthy of acknowledgement in your important world. I pulled out another page of notes, my handwriting becoming more erratic as the incident had progressed. Then the conversation took an even more disturbing turn. One of the junior partners joked about hiring help versus marrying into it, and you responded by saying, "Grace doesn't know this, but I've been encouraging her to distance herself from the cleaning lady grandmother. I've convinced her that the old woman's health problems make family gatherings stressful, so Grace has been visiting less and less. Eventually, she'll fade into the background where she belongs." I could see tears forming in Eric Patterson's eyes, and even some of the more senior executives looked genuinely shaken by what they were hearing. As I stood in that hallway, holding my mop and listening to you casually discuss your systematic plan to isolate my granddaughter from her family, from me, I realized that all my careful observation and documentation had been leading to this moment. I closed the folder and looked directly at Mason, who appeared to be on the verge of collapse. You weren't just dismissive of cleaning workers, Mason. You weren't just professionally ambitious or socially conscious about appearances. You were actively working to manipulate Grace into abandoning the people who loved her most, convincing her that her own grandmother was a source of shame rather than pride. I stood slowly, my arthritis making the movement deliberate and painful, but my voice remained steady and strong. In that moment, listening to you plot the erasure of my relationship with Grace, I realized that my 3 years of observation had revealed something far worse than simple rudeness or class prejudice. You are a man who would systematically destroy family bonds to advance your own social standing. The room remained completely silent as I gathered my notes. That's when I decided it was time for Margaret Stone to reclaim her voice. I set down my documentation and reached for my phone, scrolling to a series of text messages sent yesterday afternoon. After overhearing that conversation, I spent the remainder of my cleaning shift in a state of controlled fury. I began, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the memory. I finished my work at Hartwell and Associates mechanically, my mind racing with the implications of what Mason had revealed about his systematic manipulation of Grace. I showed the room my phone screen, displaying a message sent to someone labeled Sylvia near operations. At 11:30 a.m. yesterday, I sent this message to Sylvia Gray, our director of operations and my most trusted ally in this entire endeavor. Emergency board meeting required. Full revelation tomorrow morning. Prepare all documentation. Mason's eyes widened as he realized the scope of the preparation that had gone into this moment. You see, Mason, while you spent 3 years believing you were manipulating both Grace and an invisible cleaning lady, I spent those same 3 years building an ironclad case against you, with the help of people who actually understood loyalty and integrity. I pulled out a thick manila envelope labeled Executive Summary, Mason Stewart Performance Review. Sylvia has been my primary contact throughout this entire operation. Every observation I made, every incident I documented, every pattern of behavior I identified, was carefully reviewed and corroborated through our official company channels. I opened the envelope and spread several professional reports across the table. While Margaret Albert was documenting Mason's character from the cleaning perspective, Margaret Stone was conducting a comprehensive performance evaluation through proper corporate channels. Background checks, client feedback surveys, peer reviews from colleagues, analysis of project outcomes, everything was above board and thoroughly documented. Eric Patterson leaned forward, clearly recognizing some of the forms. Mrs. Stone, these are our standard executive assessment protocols. How did you manage to conduct a full review without the subject knowing? Simple, I replied. I authorized a company-wide performance evaluation initiative 18 months ago, ostensibly to identify high-potential employees for our management development program. Mason was included along with 15 other candidates across our various client sites. I pulled out a professional evaluation form with Mason's name at the top, completed by multiple supervisors and colleagues. The official results were quite interesting. While Mason's individual performance metrics were solid, his leadership potential scores were consistently low. Comments from colleagues described him as self-serving, poor at team collaboration, and dismissive of support staff. 3 separate supervisors noted concerns about his treatment of junior employees. Mason's face had gone pale again. I was never informed that I was being evaluated for leadership positions. Because you weren't, I replied calmly. You were being evaluated for character, and you failed comprehensively. I pulled out another set of documents, these bearing yesterday's date. After hearing your conversation yesterday morning, I spent the afternoon making phone calls. First, I contacted Grace's mother, my daughter Susan, and finally told her the complete truth about my 3-year undercover operation. I showed them a printed email sent late yesterday evening. Susan was initially shocked, then furious when she learned about Mason's systematic attempts to isolate Grace from our family. As Grace's mother, she had noticed her daughter becoming more distant, but had attributed it to natural relationship progression, not deliberate manipulation. I scrolled to another message on my phone. I also contacted Grace directly, asking her to meet me for lunch today without Mason. I told her I had something important to discuss about her future, but I didn't reveal the specifics. She deserves to hear the truth from me personally, not discover it during a corporate confrontation. Mason looked panicked. Mrs. Stone, Grace doesn't need to be involved in this company matter. Whatever issues you have with my professional conduct. This stopped being just a company matter the moment you decided to manipulate my granddaughter's family relationships. I interrupted sharply. I pulled out one final document. This one bearing the official Premier Cleaning Solutions letterhead. Last night, I also prepared your formal performance review and employment status evaluation. This meeting today isn't just a revelation, Mason. It's your official disciplinary hearing. I opened the document and began reading from it. Based on extensive documentation of workplace behavior inconsistent with company values, including but not limited to discrimination against service personnel, harassment of female employees, misrepresentation of collaborative work as individual achievement, and conduct unbecoming of a client-facing professional, Mason's hands were visibly shaking now. Mrs. Stone, please, can we discuss this privately? I'm sure we can reach some understanding. The time for private discussions ended when you told your colleagues that Grace's grandmother needed to fade into the background where she belongs, I replied, my voice like steel. I closed the document and looked around the room at the faces of my department heads, all of whom were witnessing the careful dismantling of someone they had considered a professional success story. Everything is prepared, Mason. The documentation is complete, the witnesses are assembled, and the consequences are about to begin. I stood slowly, my arthritis making the movement deliberate but my resolve absolute. Now it's time for you to face the reality of who you really are. I walked slowly around the conference table, my presence commanding absolute attention from everyone in the room. The moment I had been building toward for 3 years had finally arrived. Mason Stewart, I began formally, my voice carrying the full authority of my position. For the past 3 years you have worked in a building cleaned by Premier Cleaning Solutions. You have interacted daily with our employees, benefited from our services, and formed opinions about the people who ensure your workplace remains professional and sanitary. I stopped directly behind his chair, placing my hands on the table as I leaned forward. During those 3 years, you have demonstrated consistent disrespect for our staff, systematic discrimination based on job title and social class, and a fundamental lack of the character we require in any professional associated with our company. Mason attempted to turn around to face me, but I continued speaking, keeping him in the uncomfortable position of hearing his judgment without being able to make eye contact. But more personally, and more devastatingly, you have spent 18 months manipulating my granddaughter, convincing her that her grandmother was a source of shame, that family loyalty was less important than social appearances, and that love should be conditional on professional status. I moved back to my seat and sat down, my gaze fixed directly on his pale, sweating face. I am Margaret Stone, founder and CEO of Premier Cleaning Solutions. I employ over 800 people across 4 states. Our annual revenue exceeds $40 million. I own this building. I own the company that has been providing services to your employer, and as of this morning, I own the mortgage on the luxury apartment complex where you live. The last revelation hit like a physical blow. Mason's mouth fell open as he realized the full scope of my influence over his life. You see, Mason, while you were dismissing me as just a cleaning lady, I was systematically documenting every aspect of your character. While you were planning to manage my visibility at social events, I was building a comprehensive case against you. While you were convincing Grace that her grandmother was an embarrassment, I was preparing to show you exactly who should be embarrassed in this relationship. I pulled out a final document, an official termination notice bearing Premier Cleaning Solutions letterhead, effective immediately. Your employer's contract with Premier Cleaning Solutions is terminated. We will no longer provide services to any company that employs individuals who demonstrate the level of disrespect and discrimination you have shown our staff. Mason's face went from pale to completely white. Mrs. Stone, you can't. Hartwell and Associates has nothing to do with my personal opinions. You can't punish an entire company because I can and I will, I replied calmly. Hartwell and Associates has been informed that their account manager's behavior toward our employees makes continued service impossible. They have been given the choice: terminate Mason Stewart's employment or find a new cleaning service. I opened my phone and showed him a message received just minutes before this meeting. This text from Mr. Hartwell arrived 20 minutes ago. Miss Stone, we have accepted Mr. Stewart's resignation effective immediately. We apologize for any disrespect shown to your staff and hope to rebuild our professional relationship. Mason stared at the phone screen in horror. You've destroyed my career over a misunderstanding. I've revealed your character, I corrected. The destruction is entirely your own doing. I stood for the final time, my voice carrying 3 years of suppressed anger and disappointment. You wanted Grace's grandmother to fade into the background, Mason. Instead, you're the one who's disappearing. The conference room erupted in a chaos of whispered conversations and stunned reactions. Mason sat frozen in his chair, staring at the termination notice as if he could will it out of existence through sheer disbelief. Mrs. Stone, he finally managed, his voice cracking, surely we can discuss this rationally. I may have made some inappropriate comments, but ending my career seems disproportionate. I interrupted, settling back into my chair with calm authority. Let's talk about proportionate responses, Mason. You spent 18 months systematically isolating my granddaughter from her family. You convinced her that her grandmother was a source of shame. You planned to seat me with service staff at your wedding because you considered me beneath your social circle. Sylvia Gray, our director of operations, spoke up from her position near the door. The Hartwell and Associates decision was actually quite swift once we presented the documentation. Mr. Hartwell was particularly disturbed by the harassment allegations regarding our younger female employees. Mason's head snapped toward Sylvia. You had no right to contact my employer with unsubstantiated. Everything was substantiated. Eric Patterson interjected, his face flushed with anger. 3 years of documented incidents, corroborated by multiple witnesses, all following proper HR investigation protocols. Your behavior created a hostile work environment for our employees. I pulled out my phone and showed the room another text message. Grace responded to my lunch invitation 10 minutes ago. She'll be here at noon. I thought she should hear about your employment situation directly from you, Mason, before she learns about it from others. The remaining color drained from Mason's face. Mrs. Stone, please don't involve Grace in this business matter. Our relationship has nothing to do with— Your relationship has everything to do with this, I replied firmly. You used your position in her life to manipulate her feelings about her family. You made her question her own grandmother's worth. That makes this deeply personal. Peter Gray, our interim CEO during my absence, finally spoke from his position at the far end of the table. Mason, I think you should understand that this extends beyond your immediate employment situation. Word travels quickly in our industry. Your treatment of service personnel will be known throughout the professional community within days. Mason's composure completely cracked. You're destroying my entire future over some comments made during private conversation. This is vindictive, it's excessive, it's justice, interrupted Maria Gonzalez, who had quietly entered the room during the final revelation. She was still wearing her cleaning uniform, having come directly from her morning shift. For 3 years I cleaned your office while you treated me like I was invisible, while you mocked my profession to your friends. Mason turned to see Maria standing by the door, her dignity intact despite years of his dismissive treatment. You talked about me like I couldn't understand English, Maria continued, her voice steady and strong. You left deliberate messes to punish the young women who wouldn't respond to your inappropriate comments. You made our workplace hostile while pretending to be a professional. I stood and walked over to Maria, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Maria, would you like to tell Mason about your nursing degree?
Yeah.
Maria smiled with quiet pride. I graduated last month, Mr. Stewart. Magna cum laude. I start at Riverside General Hospital next week as a registered nurse. The cleaning ladies you dismissed will soon be saving lives. Mason stared at her in shocked silence, finally understanding that his assumptions about people had been as wrong as his character was flawed. The consequences are just beginning, Mason, I said, returning to my seat. Grace deserves to know who you really are. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Sunlight streamed through the windows as I addressed our quarterly board meeting, surrounded by faces that now looked at me with genuine respect and understanding. Premier Cleaning Solutions has experienced remarkable growth since we implemented our new respect and dignity initiatives. I reported, reviewing the statistics that validated everything I had learned during my 3 years undercover. Employee retention is up 37%, client satisfaction scores have reached all-time highs, and we've received recognition as the region's most ethical employer for the second consecutive quarter. Sylvia Gray, now officially promoted to Chief Operations Officer, smiled from her seat at the table. The workplace culture transformation has exceeded all projections, Margaret. When employees feel valued and respected, productivity naturally follows. I nodded, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. The most important lesson I learned during my time as Margaret Albert wasn't about business operations or profit margins. It was about the fundamental truth that every person deserves dignity, regardless of their job title or social status. Maria Gonzalez, now working as a registered nurse but still attending our board meetings as an employee representative, raised her hand. Mrs. Stone, what would you say to other executives considering similar undercover initiatives? I considered her question carefully. I wouldn't recommend deception as a general management strategy, but I would strongly encourage every leader to spend time genuinely listening to their frontline employees, to observe their company culture when they think no one important is watching, and to remember that character is revealed not in how we treat our equals, but in how we treat those we have power over. The door opened quietly, and Grace entered with a radiant smile, now working as our new Director of Community Relations. She had ended her engagement to Mason within hours of our revealing conversation, choosing instead to focus on her graduate studies and her meaningful work with our corporate social responsibility programs. Grandma, she said, taking her seat beside me, the community center partnership has exceeded all expectations. We've provided job training to over 200 local residents, and 15 of them have joined our company as full-time employees. I squeezed her hand, remembering the tearful conversation where she had apologized for allowing someone to make her feel ashamed of our family. You've built something beautiful, Grace. Your father would be so proud. As the meeting concluded and people began filing out, I remained seated, reflecting on the broader implications of my unusual journey. Mason Stewart had found employment with a smaller firm across the state, reportedly much humbler in his approach to colleagues and service personnel. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is helping them confront their own character. The truth is, I said to the nearly empty room, addressing no one in particular, but perhaps speaking to every leader who might one day hear this story. Respect isn't something you earn based on your position or wealth. It's something you demonstrate through your actions, especially when you think those actions don't matter. I gathered my papers and stood slowly, my arthritis a constant reminder of the physical challenges I had endured during those 3 years of invisible observation. Every person you encounter, the janitor, the cashier, the receptionist, the person serving your coffee, is someone's beloved family member, someone with dreams and dignity and value that extends far beyond their job description. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed the maintenance closet where I had stored my supplies for 3 years. The gray uniform hanging there served as a permanent reminder that true leadership isn't about commanding from the top, it's about understanding from every level. When you think no one important is watching, I murmured to myself, that's when your true character emerges, and someone is always watching who matters more than you know. The elevator doors closed, carrying me toward a future where Premier Cleaning Solutions would continue to prove that businesses built on respect and dignity don't just survive, they thrive, creating value that extends far beyond profit margins to touch the lives of everyone they serve. In the end, the most powerful position isn't CEO or founder, it's being someone who sees the worth in every human being, regardless of whether they're wearing a business suit or pushing a mop bucket. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.